So when we think about ethical dilemmas that corporations have, not just individuals, but corporations, we need to be thinking about different ways of assessing corporate social responsibility. One of those ways is triple bottom line accounting. Another way is through total responsibility management. And the last one is strategic philanthropy, which I've made reference to already in this lecture. So corporate social responsibility is defined more clearly as the obligation of management to make decisions and to take actions that enhance the welfare and interest of society as well as the organization. And within that, and that's a subheading really, if you will, of stakeholder theory. I mean, stakeholder theory wants to ensure that we're not hurting society and hurting the interests of society, because when we hurt those embedded relationships, that becomes a financial deficit for us. So what are some of the demands made on us based on the issue of corporate social responsibility? And so corporate social performance is sort of evaluated at 4 basic levels. Are you profitable? And again, go back to Milton Friedman. You know, the primary responsibility of businesses is to make profit. So, and I would not disagree that profit is an important part of what it means to be a for-profit business, right? Why do it if you're not making a profit? Even for nonprofit organizations, you got to make money in order to survive, because that's your mission, right? You make the money and the goal is just to spend it all by the end of the year. So it's, you know, a little more interesting, a little bit more challenging, but nonetheless, the principle is the same. And the goal is we have to be financially responsible and economically responsible, to be profitable, to make money. Even if it means we spend it at the end of the year as a nonprofit, we still have a responsibility to deal with the money side of things fairly. And then there's this issue of legal responsibility, the idea that we have to obey the law. And I don't think anybody would argue that if the laws are written, whether or not we like them, we do have a legal obligation to follow them. Above and beyond that, though, we have this ethical responsibility to do what is right and to avoid harm, based on ethical norms. And this goes above and beyond what the legal obligations are. It's like, even if the law says we can do something, should we? You know, that's a big question mark. And of course the answer would be, of course not. But it also depends on the lens that you're using, whether or not it would be considered an ethical behavior. And then lastly is the discretionary responsibility, the idea that what we do at our discretion just does stuff to benefit the community and the quality of life. And so in that circumstance, our goal is to make sure that you know, we are proactively doing things that benefit our community, because when our community benefits, we benefit. And so you can see why that may be. So part of that discretionary responsibility may be about thinking about our strategic landscape. Another part of it may be simply looking at what can we do altruistically to make the world a better place. So when groups put pressure on us to behave in a certain way, for example, to where pressure is being put on us to be economically responsible, to make sure that we're making money. A lot of times people may, how do I say this, more sort of respond in a way that may not be conducive and appropriate for those demands. Let's say, for example, my demand is to be profitable, and so I'm more likely to engage in obstructive behavior if my only goal is to engage in economic, responsibility, making money no matter what the cost. So think about it this way: and someone who's obstructive doesn't want to be found out that they engaged in something that was illegal or unethical. So they're going to try to dodge the bullet. They're going to try to hide from things. They're going to try to put up obstacles so that people can't, find out what they did. And again, the motivation to engage in obstructive behavior is typically driven by only focusing on the concept of economic responsibility, that we need to make money no matter what the cost is. And when we're only driven by that, the obstructive behaviors tend to be how we respond to that when we have perhaps crossed the line. In the next level, the defensive behaviors. Again, what drives defensive behaviors tends to be when we recognize that we need to engage within legalities, but only if we get caught, kind of thing. So if we're driven to, we know we need to behave legally, but we're going to try to find a way to, to find the loopholes until we get caught. People will then behave more defensively. They will say, It's they will admit to those errors, but they won't take ownership that they made the decision to behave inappropriately or illegally. They'll say, these things happen, it was just a loophole, we never ever would have done that if we had known. And a lot of times they do know. They know that they were pushing the boundaries. They know they were pushing the limits, and those things happen. So they'll admit when something's wrong, but they won't admit it fully and totally, who owned it, why they did it. It tends to be more of a passive approach to things. Things happened, things occurred, and things will be addressed. But we won't say that we necessarily did it. We'll just say that things just sort of happened. And the bottom line is they only do what's legally required. Next is this idea of the accommodative. And when we truly are focused on doing the ethical, legal, and economic benefits for the company, we tend to be more accommodative. In essence, what happens is if we find that we had an ethical lapse, that something happened, we are very much willing to take on responsibility for those actions, that we do our best to try to meet our economic, legal, and ethical responsibilities. But we accommodate. It's because someone found it and someone put pressure on us to acknowledge it. It's not necessarily in a proactive way. So it's in a reactive way, more so than anything else. We'll accommodate if you catch us doing something illegal, and we'll own it, and then we'll move on from it. The proactive is really where we're getting at the discretionary responsibility, as well as, the accommodative, defensive, and obstructive stuff. And in the proactive approach, we will take the lead. We'll be more proactive. We will make the decision without pressure to do things the right way. And Johnson & Johnson's a great example of that after the whole Tylenol scandal. No one put pressure on them to do what they did. And in the end, that became a great benefit for them because they improved their reputation, in the market. So triple bottom line accounting is an important aspect of ways to be more socially responsible. And of course, we all know and recognize the economic, right? The economic is about, what our basic, general accepted accounting principles will tell us with respect to making sure that we meet those economic requirements. But there's also social requirements, in terms of engaging in social behaviors that benefit society, and then environmental requirements. This idea of the sustainability, which is addressed more specifically in the other lecture, but how are we hurting or harming the environment, in terms of our short and long-term issues. And I think, all three of those, it's a triangle for a reason. All three of those are important, and we have to address them at some level or another. And so the more that we can focus on ensuring that we address all three of those, the better off we are, in the long haul, and having a better reputation around issues of corporate social responsibility. Total responsibility management is also looking at stakeholders and the impact of stakeholders and the pressures from stakeholders. Obviously, we have primary stakeholder pressures, owners, employees, customers, and suppliers. Those are people in that inside concentric ring of that have a really important impact on our day-to-day business. But then there's also these secondary pressures, activists and communities and groups and governments. And these secondary groups put enormous amount of pressure on us as well, wanting to make sure that we're doing things that honors the environment and honors, communities, and we don't hurt our communities. Then there's also these other institutional pressures, making sure that everybody's engaged in triple bottom line accounting and sort of the pressure, the social pressure around that. These ISO 9001, global principles and global standards, and these best of rankings, the best of companies that are environmentally friendly, the best of companies that are really good in terms of paying wages, best of companies to work for in the St. Louis area. All of these things really put pressure on people to take more responsibility, and so it's important that they engage in those things and do so. So total responsibility management has three major processes: inspiration, integration, and improvement and innovation. Obviously, it has to inspire. It has to be part of your vision. Then it has to be integrated in your strategy and in your day-to-day practices. And then lastly, we have to make sure we're always assessing whether or not what we're doing makes sense. So when we're talking about total responsibility, it's about in all aspects of what we do in our business is it's embedded in our culture and integrated in everything we do, and that we're really focusing on whether or not this is beneficial for us, and make sure we're continuing things that are beneficial and removing things from us that are not so beneficial. The last aspect is this idea of strategic philanthropy, and strategic philanthropy argues that we should do giving and philanthropy within the context of our competitive landscape. And they say your portfolio should look like this. That there's stuff that we want to do that's really altruistic in nature, the communal obligation, what we want to do to be a good citizen. So we give to the Girl Scouts, we give to the local park because, we're part of the community, and that's what you're supposed to do. It's a communal obligation. But then there's this goodwill building. It's not just about donating to the Girl Scouts, but if all of your employees have kids in the Girl Scouts, you buy their cookies, that sort of thing. If your people make donations to certain nonprofits, the company matches those donations. So that idea of a company matching program, excuse me, works that way. The last aspect is this idea of strategic giving. And strategic giving says, let's look at our competitive landscape. How can we enhance and improve our competitive landscape? Those are the areas in which we should do grants and donations and enhancements. It's where our charitable dollars should go to help our competitive landscape improve. And when we have a portfolio that has a great mix of those three things, this creates a better reputation, creates better social capital. We're more likely to have better trusting relationships with others, and in the long run, that's an advantage for us. So competitive landscape has four basic elements to it. Number one is the factor conditions, basically looking at, do we have good quality inputs? And places like McDonald's, whether or not you think McDonald's is a high quality product, but think about it this way. McDonald's, if they're going to go into a new venture in a new country, for example, they need to make sure that they've got the inputs that they want of the quality that they want. Argue whether or not it's the highest quality, separate issue, but for the quality that McDonald's sets for itself, it has to decide, is the lettuce going to be appropriate? Is the quality of the beef going to be good? Is the wheat the appropriate standard that we want in order to make our bread? And so if it's not, they'll invest in those local communities with grants and loans and things like that to ensure that the goods are at the quality that they want. So if you don't have quality goods, guess what? It's garbage in, garbage out. So if you have good quality things coming in, it improves the likelihood of good quality things coming out. The demand conditions are about seeing, can our local community buy our products? Do they want to? Do they have the economic means to do so? And if people don't have the economic means to do so, this is a problem. So this gets at some of the larger issues of, do we increase the minimum wage, and do we, what do we do to get people to participate in the economy? They have to have the financial means to do so. If they don't have it, that's a problem. So we want to make sure we're doing things to enhance the customer base in my area, in my region, in my community, at large, whatever it takes to ensure that our customers have the capabilities to be able to have an interest in buying our goods and services, and so investing in them in that way. The next is a context for strategy and rivalry. We want to make sure we've got vigorous competition. That goes in alignment with things that Milton Friedman has talked about. So we want to make sure that we've got competition. Monopolies are not good for the customer, and ultimately they're not good for us because someone is going to come down on us eventually. So in the context of strategy and rivalry, we want vigorous competition so we can engage in that. And then we want to make sure that we have related and supporting industries. For example, any suppliers or other related industries that can support us, we want to make sure that we can support them so that we have an industry that can be thriving in all aspects and is supported in all aspects. So what are some of the things we can do with that philanthropy? What are some of the ways we can do this? Well, we want to make sure if we're giving grants, we've got good grantees, that we're letting funders know that these are good people to give grants to. If we're doing, working with local groups, we can say to funding sources, hey, invest here. This is a good group to invest in. We want to make sure that we're investing in the recipients of those grants. And JP Morgan used to have a program where they would give grants to nonprofits, and then they would also work with putting business school interns, people who are getting their MBA. They would put them in with these nonprofits to help support the nonprofits so that if they're giving them money, they don't let them flounder on top of it all. And then making sure that we think about the sake of advancing knowledge. We want to make sure we're advancing knowledge. The goal here is we want to create partnerships and joint ventures and things that really help the overall community at large, and that we're focusing on short-term and long-term focus, not just short-term focus. All of it is important. So that's it on strategic philanthropy and corporate social responsibility.